Hey, welcome to Leadership Within, the moment for leaders to reflect on their human experience of leadership. I'm your host, TK, and I'm joined by
Vanessa.
Hey Vanessa, lovely as always to talk with you today.
Likewise, nice to be on this podcast after a little break.
After a little break, it always is a good idea to have some reflection time because it brings a better conversation in, some more, thoughtful ideas. So, what I wanted to talk about today is something that has been dear to my heart recently, and I've been talking to a lot of people about it. And I thought, well, it would be a good idea to have a conversation about it with you, which is why is it important to have a mentor, especially when you're starting as a leader? Hmm. I'm wondering what you think, Vanessa, and is mentoring something that, well, you've dabbled with?
Yeah, it's funny because I've just recently signed up to something, uh, and one of the reasons is because I recognise that I haven't walked that path,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels safer, more helpful, that I might get there quicker by being with someone's or in someone's mentorship.
Oh, well,
So it's
you know
kind of
what?
timely.
It definitely is something that I've also discovered, especially this year. I've never been any good with. I've had mentees, but I've always struggled with having mentors. And it's a maybe a tradition of mine to start with some kind of a story. Um, I think the first time someone actually had the label of a mentor, and it was my assigned mentor, has been in, I don't know, 2010, when I've joined a local Toastmasters chapter, right? And the interesting thing was, I should classify this wonderful person as my first mentor, and they were incredibly experienced. The thing is that at this time, I had this aura of, I don't know, maybe I was too confident. Maybe I just presented myself as if I knew everything. And this person said, "Oh, yeah, TK, you probably know it all, do you?" I was like, "Yeah, I have some idea of how it works." Okay, good. And that's the first, last, and only mentoring conversation we ever had. And it's such a huge shame, I think. So maybe for me, it was the demeanor of not being ready and accepting of a mentor. So that's a story I wanted to share. Any story that you want to give our
Yeah, well,
listeners?
it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking, have I
Yeah.
ever had a formal mentor? Like, so in the corporate world, have I ever had a formal mentor? And the answer is no, I've never had.
Hmm.
However, there have always been um, leaders or people around me that I was drawn to, and and unconsciously, I think probably, they modelled things for me, and I respected them, and therefore
Hmm.
would have said they were kind of like an informal mentor. But I never, it wasn't a thing really when I was working in the corporate world. It wasn't a huge thing unless you did like a graduate training scheme, and then you might have
Mm-hmm.
had something there. It really wasn't a thing. Coaching was kind of probably taking off, and there was more. You could get a coach, but mentorship less so. And yeah, I think so. I would say I'm coming to mentorship later in life, much later in life, and it's coming from me when I realize, like, okay, I could try and do this alone, but it's going to take me a hell of a long time, and it's going to be lonely, and I'm going to make mistakes that I could bypass if I had someone who's kind of been there, done it, got the t-shirt, and is going to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, share their wisdom with me. So I find that quite interesting because both of us are saying, we didn't necessarily have them, and yet we're
But
both saying we recognize the value of them.
yes, and what's really interesting is like I'll stop on and talk about one thing for a moment, which is like you've talked about this informal relationship. So I myself think that obviously saying the word formal is a bit formal and stuffy, but what I wanted to say is embracing this particular name and the responsibility that comes from calling yourself a mentor or calling yourself a mentee, however, whatever words you use, is actually a bit more helpful than doing it, at least in my personal opinion, than doing it completely, off the books and unofficially, because there's this acknowledgement of the responsibility that both parties have. But I'm wondering what you think.
No,
Maybe
I
we
agree with you.
yeah.
I think it's an acknowledgement of the relationship. And if I'm being brutally honest with myself, if I go back to my younger years when I was kind of like trying to climb the ladder and prove certain things, for me to have sought out actively a mentor would probably have felt quite vulnerable. In terms of I'd have to admit that I didn't know stuff. And that's not something you always want to admit.
No, no, absolutely. And this
I
is,
think that's
you know
dreadful.
what? I'm just saying that because I want to get back to it later in the podcast, when we talk about the difficulties and when it comes to asking for a mentor, for, especially when it's like, it's not unofficial, but now we're giving it a label. But
Mm.
as we will get back to it, let's talk about what is it that throughout your life, you've been getting from your mentors, officially or not. What is it that you think was the thing that they helped with?
Yeah, I think they kind of embodied who I wanted to become. So what I mean by that, I remember particularly starting out in the coactive fundamentals, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a male and female lead, and they were incredible together, like really, really skilled. And I remember thinking, God, I'd love my marriage to be like that, but I'd also, I'd love to be like that. And then at the very end, they told you that they were married, and you were like, whoa,
Mm.
you must have an amazing marriage, right? Because you guys listen and you dance so well together. And I think I've often had that feeling of I want to be like you. I want to, when I grow up, um, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to grow up, but there we go. When I grow up, I want to be like that, like the way that you can hold a conversation, the way that you can deal with discomfort, the way that whatever it is. I think for me to have a mentor, I need to see that they are embodying, they're congruent, there's something that they've clearly been through and transformed. And so they're like holding a higher potential for me.
Mm. Yeah, I get it, right? So there's this openness because there's such of a difference. It's just easier to ask, easier to take it in. And I'm just reflecting on my own stance as a leader and people that I would be able to call mentors. And sadly, because unofficial, I haven't asked. I'm just now, and as you were talking, I was thinking about these particular people. And there's one person, his name is Tobias, that I would think that has been a mentor for me. Although we haven't had many conversations, I was in quite a few of his sessions. I've read and listened to a lot of quote unquote content from him. So, I've idealized the person. But the way that they impacted me is they imparted a particular style, right? What I've seen is, again, similar to yourself, I tried mimicking the way this person works. Then again, what I have found is it wasn't necessarily terribly productive because I'm not the same person. And there's differences in
Yeah.
terms of my own preference and my own strengths to his. And it's been a dangerous journey when, they veered into spirituality. I'm not that much of a spiritual person myself, confronting that particular thing. So I'm asking myself, what would be even more difficult without having a mentor? And I'm having to answer this question by saying, well, you have to discover things by making sometimes costly mistakes. Sometimes it's not the cost of, money nor time, but the cost of admitting your own faults and vulnerability in various circumstances. So what is it that you think, without having a leadership mentor, is difficult for you, your clients, or people you know?
So if they don't have one,
Yeah.
I think sometimes you're in the dark, like you don't know what you don't know. And there are times when coaching, for example,
Mm.
is not necessarily helpful because you actually need someone to say, here's what I did in that situation. I think you know that is helpful at times, in life and in, I mean, I'm thinking about situations in my life where I've never had to navigate them. I've never had to navigate the loss of a parent. I've never had to
Mm.
yet. I've never had of anyone. And yeah, I know that I will have to. So actually having someone that I can turn to for a bit of spiritual mentorship through that and say, I don't know how to be, like, help me, is really helpful, because I don't want someone to coach me. You know, that's not what I would look for in that situation. And equally, if someone gave me advice, I'd find that unhelpful. In that, because I would want someone that I knew had handled it in a way that was um, respectful, gentle, all these different things. So I feel like that being able to, and I wonder if this is part of the problem actually. Sometimes what I hear, particularly if I took women as an example in leadership,
Mm-hmm.
is when they look up, they don't necessarily see the female mentors that they want to be like. So how do you find a mentor when actually you don't really want to pursue something in the same kind of way that someone else has? And I think what you said is really important about, it's not about becoming that person. And there is this danger where you're like, oh, I want to be like you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of lose parts of yourself, because you're trying to emulate. And actually that's not terribly authentic, and it doesn't feel very congruent. So I think it is, there are dangers. But actually, if you had really great design as you go into a relationship or a mentoring relationship, you talked about all this stuff, then I think it might be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on the fact of, in life, outside of work, in work, wherever we practice leadership, how much of a treasure it is to have this network of people we can rely on in various situations, right? I mean, it's a
Yeah.
platitude to say that, but yet you would think that looking at the modern shape of reality and society, how on earth did we manage to get ourselves so pulled apart from each other? Not to have that, because that's, how we evolved, right? And that's such a beautiful thing. So maybe, if I go forth, and let's talk about a different dimension, which is myself, yourself as a mentor. So I ask dangerous questions, some people tell me. And one of the questions I'm asking, depending on what's the profession or something, is the thought-provoking one, which is, what kind of a mentor are you, Vanessa?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure that I am. um, I don't know. So, well, I'm not a formal mentor to anybody, and I don't know that I can answer that question. Um, Maybe I'm a mentor to my girls
Mm-hmm.
in some respects. I'm a very imperfect mentor. I would say I'm a transparent one. So I try to open up, uh, and not come from a place of perfection, but just, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what I'm learning. Um, but I'm not sure. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I once had this. I was doing some work, and people were um,
Mm-hmm.
looking at um, different aspects of themselves and kind of trying to get their inside team together. And someone picked me for their inside team, and I was like really shocked. And I remember my the boss of the business that I was working in saying, you know, will they see you, or she sees you as someone, you know, who is a mentor? And I'm like, wow. You know, like sometimes you're like, really?
So what kind of a mentor were you then to have?
I think I was just authentic. I think that's probably what she saw, was like someone that was open, authentic, emotional, real, you know, messy. I think she saw that as that, and strong. Um, and so I think she probably just thought, rather than having to be suited and professional and cool all the time, actually you could bring more of your personality. So I think it was more of a, how do I bring my authenticity into my work? Oh, Vanessa seems to model that. You know, she's quite comfortable making a mistake or forgetting what she was going to say or whatever in the front of a room, or being quite funny or whatever. And I think so maybe someone that brings color and flavor into a room, like you were saying, you bring dangerous questions, you know, so that might mentor someone that was asking very safe questions. You know, it might, they unconsciously, they might think, ooh, I'd love to be able to ask more edgy questions.
Can imagine it's something that a mentee would definitely get from you. No, it's a wonderful thing where the people we were helping throughout our lives maybe not always are at the front, right? But when you dove in, you remembered this wonderful lady that, you know, hopefully you've made a positive mark on her life.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Well, I'm thinking about the people that have asked me for help. Yeah, it's difficult, I think, because you know what? I think I've neglected some, and now I'm looking at it through the lens of maybe being neglected by mentors myself. So, if you were to ask me now what kind of a mentor I am, I would say that caring is the first adjective I would use. Right? I always make sure that the person, like, as much as, you know, the relationship is shaped by time or whatever it is, because there's various kinds of interactions you can have with the mentor. But when I'm interacting with people that have asked me to be their mentor, I always make sure that they know that I care for them. I think this is the most important thing. As a coach, obviously, it's not necessarily my job in this particular way, but I really want to make sure that they're at the forefront of this relationship. And I haven't been doing this prior to this year, but now I'm just like, look, I've got opinions. I'm more than happy to share my opinions with you, but is that okay? What would you like feedback on? What is it in particular? Am I getting this right? So really trying to make sure that the person gets as much as they can, although sometimes I can be very critical. Now the challenge is, way back when, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, when I've been a mentor and I've mentioned Toastmasters, so that's an institution that has this scheme. Yeah, I thought, well, I've gave them the basics. I did my best to get them prepared to start on, but I didn't follow up on the relationship as much as I could have. And you know what? I think they were trying to reach out to get more wisdom from me, and I didn't necessarily see it. Then again, I can see it now at least, so maybe I should get in touch with them.
Maybe, who knows, right?
Who knows? It reminds
Maybe
me of
that's an
something.
interesting
Yeah.
question, though. It's like, whose
Yeah.
responsibility is it to reach out? Is it the mentees? Is it the mentor? You know, where does responsibility sit in that relationship?
But there's this dance, to be honest, Vanessa. It's like, you know, if they were reaching out and I didn't give them the signs of acceptance, that I'm willing to, I don't know, have another meeting, take them in, give them some of my mentoring, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, it's like, yeah, it might dwindle. And it has. And it's, hey, such a shame, I think. And it's something I need to do something with. A decade or a decade and a half afterwards, which, it's a good reflection. And hopefully, if you're a listener, which you are because you're listening to us, think about people that you've been mentoring throughout the years. And maybe, even if it's 20 years on and they're still walking this wonderful earth, maybe you want to follow up with them based on our reflections. Anyway, let's move on. Yeah, go ahead.
You're making me think about, in the corporate world, who is best placed to be your mentor and what are some of the dynamics that get in the way. So I was thinking, the natural, often your mentor isn't actually your line manager.
Which is the way to go, yeah.
Right? Which is someone outside. But then the relational dynamics that can bring up are quite interesting and often get overlooked. Right? I report into my line manager.
Mm-hmm.
He or she has they have certain ways that they want me to behave or do things. And then, there's another person in this dynamic as a mentor that is also advice giving or, shaping things. And I was just thinking about in some of the corporate places that I've worked, I think looking back, that dynamic was probably not relationally built. There was a structure there for it, but actually what we didn't think about was necessarily how egos would get in the way of that.
Ah, yes. Well, they always do, right? Not every mentor is a coach, and not everyone can have the preparation to handle it.
Yeah.
Then again, I think many people talk about like leaders being coaches and so on, and I always caution them by saying, well, it's a lot of work to become a coach. And it's not such an amount to become a mentor, but there's some training needed still, right? There's things that as a mentor, you need to be careful of, right? You've mentioned ego, but I'm sure there's other things that you've seen people that, thought they are mentors that probably, want to learn something. So what is it that you think a mentor needs to know, except, their obvious proficiency in the topic that they're competent in? But mentoring itself, if you were to train mentors, what would be the most important aspects you would teach them?
I think what comes up for me is just having a conversation about boundaries and how we do mentorship is really, that's what I'd want them to know. Like it's just as important as actually giving the advice or, sharing the wisdom is there's something about respect in it for me. So one of the things that can jar in me around mentorship is and I said it before, when I look back was like, well, if I need a mentor, then maybe they're giving me a mentor because something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and I think all of those conversations need to be really explicit. Because when they're explicit, we can design for, okay, what's going to happen when ... And I just feel, looking back at my career and looking back at some of the support systems, often what was most missed were the opportunities to set things up in a way that was relational. So, rather than you kind of going along cap in hand to a mentor and them having power and you being like, oh my God, I'm so grateful. Thank you. Now I'll go off and do what you said. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think modern mentorship is different. And you would probably know more about that in the agile world than me. That makes me curious. Like what do you see as modern mentorship?
Well, I don't know if I'm necessarily a proper expert on that. I think, the interesting thing is being a mentor while also having the preparation, the skill, the ability to be a coach, right? So it definitely is helpful to understand how these stances are different, obviously, but also having the skills of a coach. So in the world I operate in, and it isn't an agile world anymore, it's more to do with two things. It's when I help and organizations to train their mentors, what I focus on is be cognizant of the problem with authority, problem with the fact that people may be a bit timid to ask. So as a mentor, you have to have your ears open for even the smallest signs, because people might not be willing to be as open with you because of the difference in status. Even if you're not the line manager, there is a perceived difference. And the second one is what can really help is constantly, and it's like something that obviously we have in coaching, constantly asking about what's the important thing for the mentee. Am I serving you now? What would you like to talk about now? Is what we're talking about now the thing that you want to explore? Instead of like obviously going on a rant, as many mentors do, because there's the person that listens to me. So let me go on about something that I feel is interesting. That's this small thing, which is like, okay, what would you like to have the feedback on that? What would you like me to help you with? And that's the question, I think, which is also something that a mentee needs to be prepared for. You need to come with an agenda. So that's what I'm always trying to develop these programs as. But I promised we would get back to something. And I think this is a big one. In fact, I think this is something that stopped me from having mentors most of my life, which is it's very difficult, at least for me, to ask someone to become my mentor. And I don't know if you have the same experience, Vanessa.
Yeah, I remember doing it once, and someone saying yes, and then just fading, like because they were just too busy or whatever. That I felt like they said yes because they just wanted to please. But yeah, I'm similar. To go up and ask someone to be my mentor is challenging.
And you've just touched on so that's the thing, right? Someone with authority, someone that, as you've mentioned at the beginning of this episode, you really value, you even might want to emulate, someone that has some huge respect from you, essentially rejected you. I'm not saying that happened for you personally, but it's a big fear that I have personally.
Or I've also had it where someone who I respect is then caught up in politics within the organization, and then maybe the organization doesn't, like the senior leadership doesn't then respect that person in the same way, and you're like really emotionally torn.
Oh man.
That was really uncomfortable for me.
So, right. So, winding back, knowing what we know about ourselves, what is the advice? Because I guess we would love our listeners to be in the situation you've described, to have people around them to ask the questions that, and have the experiences that you've described. But yeah, what advice can we give people to actually, get on and ask the person they want to be their mentor?
Yeah, I think the top one that comes up for me is look beyond your organization, look externally. So if I was looking for someone now, someone maybe not directly in the same niche as me, but someone who I felt really walked their talk and could offer me insight and awareness and advice when I needed to. But I think I would want to go, certainly if I was working in the corporate world, I would want an external. I would want to look externally as well as potentially internally.
Yeah. My advice is, well, so what if they ghost you? So what if they just stand up and say they're okay to be your mentor and not do that? I don't think it necessarily tells anything about you that you're being rejected. I think it's on them. Because think about that. And if you're a leader, if you're someone listening to that podcast, I'm sure you care about people, right? And would you yourself behave in this way towards a person, reject them, if you see in their eyes that you have their huge respect? I guess you wouldn't. So maybe, and I'm not being, facetious here or anything, they're not the person you're idealizing them to be. And if there's a person that really is to be your mentor, they will gladly say yes Because again, I'm sure you are also giving back, and that's what I'm doing, mentoring people, because some people have said yes to me, so I can do nothing else than say yes to some others.
So I think building on that, there's something practical for me around. We're using the word mentoring, but if we are clear, what are the behaviors that we're looking for from someone? Are we looking for them, going up to someone and saying, will you be my mentor? Like there's a kind of like, there's a flattery that someone can be like, oh, I've been asked, they think I'm cool or whatever. And I think it's very different to a specific request that says, I'm looking for someone to meet with me, once a fortnight, once every month. And how I see this going down is I want to be able to share some of the top things that are, that I'm really struggling with and just process those through with someone that's been there. I think you've done that. Would you be available? And could we schedule time? I think that's a much more direct and specific approach than, will you be my mentor? It's kind of like, will you be my girlfriend? Am I being facetious? Probably.
Well, I'm not going to edit it out, but I'm definitely taking notes as to what I've been doing wrong when asking for a mentor. Well, maybe not in the same way as asking for, for someone to be my date or anything, but I think you gave some great practical advice. And, thankfully we're on video, because I'm blushing a bit by the fact, how did I mess it up? And, thankfully I'm married. So.
I just think it's what we do. We make requests as humans. We're nervous of being rejected, and actually we're not really clear on what are we asking for. And it's not until, I don't know, I think I'm in my latter stages in life, I'm like, am I being clear? Am I, behaviorally, what is it that I want to see and experience? And then that is a clear request. But I think often we don't make clear requests.
No, and it's interesting that you've mentioned it, right? Being overwhelmed by the fear of rejection makes us behave like in the example you gave.
Oh God, I'm dreadful. If I think I'm going to be rejected, I can schmooze, which I really don't like. It's just like, please, pretty please. I mean, I wouldn't quite do it like that, but I'd be like, and I think that's where your point to, it's very easy to put people on pedestals. And really in mentorship, what we're talking about is someone's been through something and come out the other side. And so they're not sharing da-da moments, they're sharing, the kind of grit and gruel and all the stuff that they had to go through. So that you can kind of build that into your consciousness as you walk that path. That's how I see it. And I just think the more we can discern, what is the type of behavioral person that would bring that quality to a conversation, it becomes less about, do I like their personality and do I think they're cool? And much more about, what are the insights, wisdoms, behaviors that they have done that I might learn from.
And on this practical note, I think it's a good idea to end this episode. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you so much for sharing all the insights, Vanessa. And as always, we hope that you'll stay with us and come back to us for the next episode in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.